The night market of wonders. Elorin Brightlea woke before the first bird had made a single note and lay in the pale hush of Wistmere, feeling the even tide of his breath settle in the way the sea had taught him, slow and sure and kind. And when he sat up, the candle that never tired greeted him with a small round glow that made the stone at the window seem almost warm to the touch. He pressed his palm to the sill, and the tower answered with a patient coolness. And in that friendly exchange he remembered the inner needle he had learned to follow, the little compass that points toward the heart and not the horizon. And he felt it quietly within him as a steadying presence, a listener that knows how to smile from the inside. Master Aldrin paused in the doorway with a cup of tea that smelled faintly of mint and linen and morning rain, and he listened for a moment to the river and then to the boy and said that some markets only open when the sky is thinking about sleep. And if one wishes to visit them, it helps to carry a pocket full of gentle stories. And he left the thought there on the table like a folded map that would open by itself when the time was ready. Elorin dressed with unhurried hands and thanked the room for watching over his dreams. And he set the traveler light upon the sill so it could sip a little of the fading moon. And he stepped outside where the orchard counted its leaves and the river braided silver into the air. And he walked to the gate with the feeling that the world had tucked a secret behind its ear for him to find. All that day he moved through small kindnesses and let each act teach him its own quiet spell. He swept the stair with strokes as calm as cloud. He refilled the bowls that catch starlight for the garden. He folded a cloth in a way that taught it to remember its corners. He whispered hello to the boots under the willow and let the breeze comb his thoughts. And in every motion the compass of stillness rested against his ribs like a cat that has chosen a lap. Near dusk he carried bread and a small pot of honey to the candle maker in the village, and they sat by the open door and watched lamplight begin to collect along the lane. And the old artisan spoke of wicks as paths and of wax as time, and then fell silent. And in that silence Elorin felt his eyes grow soft the way water grows soft under twilight. On the walk home the first cricket made its measured praise of evening, and the owl passed across the orchard with a sound like a slow brush against silk. And when Elorin reached the tower he found that the night had drawn a wider room around everything and left the door ajar. He lit the traveler light with the never-tiring candle and placed it in the window. And the flame stood without greed, and the air deepened with a sweetness like distant clover, and somewhere the river put a new thought into its song. Elorin lay upon his bed facing the smooth stone and let a longer exhale unwrap itself from his chest. And in that gentle unwrapping the floor seemed to tilt a little, not to startle him, only to invite, and a hush like pages turning came from beneath the boards as if memory itself had decided to walk lightly upstairs. The room dimmed without shadow, the candle kept its place, the traveler light steadied like a pearl, and behind his closed eyes a lane of soft blue opened across the dark. A lane lined with lantern moths whose bodies glowed as if written upon by kind stars. He rose in his dream and placed human feet upon that lane and felt its surface greet him like a hand. And he walked without hurry into a night that shone with a patient promise. Beyond the orchard the lane widened into a square that had not been there before, a place that lived only in the hours when the world leans toward rest. And upon the square stood a market made of shade and glimmer and the easy breath of the moon. Stalls unfurled like lilies opening in water, canopies of velvet blue and green as soft as fern, strings of dew-bright beads that caught every glance and returned it calmer. And the ground was polished by countless gentle steps, a floor of old stories that knew how to welcome new ones. Elorin felt no need to speak, for the whole place spoke already in the language of comfortable quiet. The first stall he came to offered bottled laughter, clear glass flasks stoppered with corks that had tiny silver threads through them, and inside each bottle a different brightness waited, a ripple of meadow joy, a kitchen chuckle that smells of cinnamon and apples, a library giggle that remembers dust and sunlight, a river peal that plays with stones, and each bottle had a label written in looping hand that said where the laughter had been found and who had forgotten to take it home. The seller had kind eyes and sleeves rolled to the elbow, and he told Elorin that coins did not matter here because coins remember only themselves, and that the market preferred payment in stories, which are a kind of seed. Elorin placed his palm upon the counter and spoke a small story of the gate at Wistmere and the day it learned to open without complaint. And as he spoke, the bottled laughter nearest to him brightened at the phrase without complaint, as if it had been waiting for those words. And the seller smiled and slid the bottle toward him. Elorin did not take it. He simply closed his hand over the glass for a moment and listened to the soft jostle of remembered mirth, and then left it on the counter. And the seller nodded, for to share a story is sometimes enough to release a light back into the air. At the next stall a weaver in a shawl of pale moss displayed folded dreams. They lay stacked like linens, tied in bundles with ribbon the color of dawn mist, and when the weaver lifted a corner with careful fingers, the fold released a fragrance like rain on stone and showed the faintest picture, a hill that remembers children rolling down its side, a kitchen table that has heard 100 songs, a pocket full of small shells warmed by a generous hand. The weaver asked Elorin for a story, and he told her about the basin of sand in the cave where the dragon sleeps, how a spiral drawn with a fingertip remains until the floor hums and the sand returns itself to smoothness. And the weaver exhaled with pleasure and untied a ribbon so he could place his palm upon a linen of dream that held the hush of a forest at first light. And when he let go, the picture folded itself away, and his palm felt cool and clean as if a spring had passed through it. Further along he came to jars of music, rows of clear glass with metal lids, and within each jar a curl of sound rested like a sleeping ribbon. When Elorin leaned close he could hear the shapes. There was the round purring of a kettle as it agrees to sing. There was a handful of notes made by rain walking across a sill. There was the soft tapping of a spoon at the end of a recipe. There was the low hymn of bees who have finished their morning work and are telling one another about clover. The seller lifted a jar and held it up to the moon, and the curl of music loosened a little as if stretching. and Elorin offered a small story about the harp beneath the floorboards and the way a room can feel taller when a single true note is given to it. And the curl brightened and then rested again as if it had been fed. He came to a stand where a kindly woman sold maps to places that do not stay put. She explained that the maps were less about locations and more about friendships, that they would change slightly as one changed, which is the honest work of any good map. And Elorin paid with a story about the robin by the wall who let sunlight arrive without posing. And the woman traced a new line upon a parchment with a brush that made no sound. And the line shone briefly and then settled into the paper like a thought into a quiet mind. A man in a coat the color of deep wells sold names for the breezes that visit certain windows at certain hours. Elorin listened to the names and let them live in his mouth for a moment and then released them back to the night, for a name is lighter when it is shared. There were booths of spun moon silk that cools the forehead, bowls filled with patient silences shaped like river stones, shelves of soft clocks that count only the time between long breaths, crates of kind excuses for leaving early when leaving early is the right kindness, and a small trunk of folded distances one can take out when a room asks for space. Everywhere Elorin found faces that smiled without asking and hands that treated every jar and fold as if it were a sleeping animal. Near the center of the square, a fountain murmured with water the color of tea and milk and offered tiny cups to anyone who wished to sip. And each sip tasted faintly of the first time one realizes a worry can be set down and will still be there later if needed, and probably will not be needed. The compass of stillness warmed inside him and asked him to slow even more. And when he did, the market seemed to become clearer without becoming louder. A stall of borrowed goodbyes invited him to select a farewell that left everyone lighter, and he chose one that felt like the soft close of a book that will be opened again. At a table near the fountain, a child sat with a box of stray buttons and invited Elorin to choose one for his robe. And he chose a small blue that matched the sky above the river at a very particular hour. And the child accepted a story in return about a bowl that caught a star and held it until morning without asking to be thanked. He found a place where soft weather was kept in sealed envelopes, each addressed to a feeling and a season. He picked up winter for a listening day and let it rest against his cheek, and a coolness like clean linen made him close his eyes with gratitude. There were lantern moths everywhere, their wings whispering a paper music as they drifted, and each time they passed a stall the light upon that counter lifted and settled with a small bow, as shop lights bow to a friend after the bell is rung. Elorin felt that the night itself was breathing through the square, in and out, and that his own breath had become a thread that stitched his small heart to that large rhythm, and it soothed him so well that he almost forgot to be curious about what lay at the far end of the market. He went there when his feet decided the time had come. At the far end, a pavilion waited beneath a canopy sewn from the deeper shades of evening, and within it a circle of listeners sat in easy silence around a low table where a small bell and a stack of thin leaf cards rested. A sign invited any guest to ring the bell and offer a story, which would become its own coin for the hour. Elorin watched a gardener speak about the spring night when toads sang and seeds turned more easily, and a baker describe a quiet loaf that rose as if encouraged by a dream, and a shepherd remember a morning when a low cloud let the flock wear a piece of sky. With each telling, the lantern moths dipped as if in greeting, and the breath of the circle grew even. When the bell seemed to glance his way, he stepped forward and touched it with the care one gives a book that has comforted many hands. He told of the inward compass that points to listening, of the gate at Wistmere that learned to open without complaint, of a schoolroom that widened when breath was shared, and of the dragon asleep under stone stars who taught him that rest is a powerful shape. No applause followed, only a warm murmur that wrapped the group like a shawl. The elder who kept the pavilion gave him a leaf card marked with 2 nested ripples and said it would let him take home what wished to travel and leave behind what wished to stay. He tucked the card beside the quiet needle and wandered on with a heart that felt peacefully awake. A stall of pauses offered silences for many moments, a step out of rain to hear the eaves, a last taste of fruit, a standing beside a friend who does not need words. He chose one called The Breath After Forgiveness and traded a story of a door closed softly so that sleep would not scatter, and the pause became part of him with a hush that felt like down. At a long table of folded distances, he learned to unfold a finger's width of space between thoughts so that a kinder third thought could arrive, and he paid with the memory of a mint leaf that taught his cheeks to soften. Near the fountain, a musician circled the rims of water bowls until a slow light rose from their mouths, and he sat and let the sound open his chest. In a small tent made of midnight blue, a woman with eyes like river stones set a mirror before him and asked only for a story. He spoke of how the tower listens, how wood sets down its day and stone remembers the river, and the mirror returned his own face softened by patience. The woman said sometimes the finest purchase is a better way to see what one already has. At the edge of the square, a boy his age tied ribbons around paper packages of small wishes that had been misplaced, and Elorin chose one labeled "A Window Opened for a Night Where Rain Speaks Kindly," and paid with the story of the robin who let the sun look at its breast without posing. He held the parcel and liked the idea of a window choosing such work. When the bell in the pavilion rang by itself, every stall began to gather its wares with unhurried hands as if tucking children into bed. Elorin stood with a full but quiet feeling and asked the inward compass what should go home. He needed no bottles or jars, for their lessons were already drifting freely like perfume. He returned to the stall of pauses and received a tiny blue moment called the breath between listening and answering. The woman of the mirror gave him a polished square of stone that would remember his calm when he was busy. The elder captured the bell's soft note in a seed-shaped jar and said this sound may widen rooms that wish for kinder corners. The square grew thinner in the air as if its beams were made of fragrance, and one by one the canopies folded back into the friendly dark. Elorin walked the lane of blue toward the orchard while the moths tidied the crumbs of light. Back in his room, he set the seed jar beside the traveler light, the polished square upon his table, and let the tiny blue paws settle upon his tongue like a mint. He lay on his side facing the stone that remembers the river and thanked the market for teaching that stories are bridges as well as coins. And he fell asleep as a lake falls asleep when the wind has finished its sentence. Toward morning he dreamed that he kept a stall of simple chairs shaped for tired shoulders, and he accepted payment in short stories about a dropped spoon, a door that sighed, and a friend who found the right word, and each story made the next chair more comfortable. At dawn the traveler light still glowed like a pearl, and the seed jar kept its promise. He washed and stepped into a day that had been practicing its brightness. The orchard lifted its small hands, the river smiled a wide silver smile, the tower eased its wooden bones, and Master Aldrin asked whether the night had kept its promises. Elorin told him in soft lines about the bell and the mirror and the pause, and the elder nodded as if confirming a list written long ago. They ate bread and honey and went about the morning requests, and everywhere Elorin placed his feet he found that the market had come home in little ways. The broom learned a kinder rhythm, the hinge accepted a drop of oil with cheerful gratitude, the kettle sang at a volume that knew it would be heard, and in the schoolroom he opened the seed jar for a single heartbeat so the note could drift through the corners and make them rounder. Later Elorin sat beneath the willow and opened the polished square in his palm and saw not his face but the calm he had left there, and he laughed quietly at the generosity of stone. In the afternoon he helped the candle maker pack a basket of lights to send to a family whose windows had been sad, and tucked among the candles a small card that said the bearer of this flame carries a story, which is why it burns so clear. When evening came the moths arrived to read the sky, and the owl wrote a pale sentence across the orchard. At the gate Elorin rested his hand upon the latch and listened for any wish it had to speak, then lifted it, and the gate opened at once as a friend does. That night he kept the inward compass in mind and felt the needle rest upon the quiet center of his chest. With the seed jar and the polished reminder near, he breathed as slowly as the sea breathes to itself and stepped once more onto the blue lane, not to shop but to wave at the square while it slept. He could feel the bottled laughter mingling with night air, the folded dreams returning to pillows, the jars of music uncorking themselves at kitchen tables, and he thanked everything for being so willing to go home. In the pocket before dawn the world had kept all its gentle agreements. He understood that the market would appear whenever the sky leaned toward rest and his breath leaned with it. If anyone asked what he had bought, he would say that he purchased nothing and received many things, which is one of the best ways for a market and a boy to say good night